you read Mark's book, you said it pinged for you. Something made sense. If you had to tie some kind of an emotion or an aha moment to the work itself for you, is there one that comes up for you?
There's so many that I can't pick one. I can say that, well, the one that's coming up is the break in the bond with the mother. And when I read the list of things that could potentially lead to a break in the bond with my relationship with my mother, I was like, check, 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 like almost every one of them. And then when I read further in there, at some point he talks about the epigenetics of whatever your grandmother was going through while she was carrying your mother in her womb are the things that got encoded into her genetic eggs that are developed in her when she's in her mother's womb, that will impact on how your body reacts to certain stimuli or things in your world environment. Like, those things are encoded in what was your grandmother going through? What was my grandmother going through while she was pregnant with my mother?
It's crazy to think about that, but it makes perfect sense.
And for someone like me, it's the Great Depression or World War II. And you start thinking about, I started to think about how were my reactions to my situation in the world more like someone who was going through the end of World War II or the Great Depression? What was going on in their life? What were they thinking about? What was actually happening? And it made a lot of sense. Like, this is almost not my thinking, because it didn't fit the circumstances I was in. I had different resources. It didn't make sense that I was reacting in the way I was. And then the second part of that is coming very, very clear is when he talks about orphaned children, or children that lose their parents, young, or they don't know who their parents are, those kinds of things, but especially young children who lose their parents to death or they leave. And you start going through the different, I start doing the genealogy. It's the first time in my life I ever thought that my past was of interest, that my family tree was of any interest to me. And then I realize, my mom's mom, my Grammy, her dad was an alcoholic and left her mother when her mother was 4 or 5 months pregnant. So mom goes back home to live with her mom, and within 2.5 years of giving birth passes away. So my Grammy has lost her mother at 2.5, and then lived with her grandmother, who then died when she was 10.5-ish, 10.5, 11. Then she went to live with an aunt who resented the fact that she had to take care of this little brat. Interesting scenario. Well, the man she marries, my grandpa, when he was 10 or 11, his dad was put into an asylum, and he actually literally died of worrying himself to death in an asylum, because He was a store owner. He was a grocery store owner during the Great Depression, and he wouldn't turn people down when they came needing food and they're starving. He offered them food without payment. Well, when the bank finally said, because he couldn't make his payments, the bank was going to take his business away, which worried him to death. So he's put in this asylum and dies. Well, here's my grandpa at like 11. Before the bank actually stepped in, his mom tried to run the store. And he was like the man of the house now.
Mm-hmm.
And so he loses his dad. And then they lose the business. Like, they lose everything. Which is a curious thing, because I've always, like, for as long as I can remember, always said no deed goes unpunished. And I always hated the movie The Christmas Story, because in The Christmas Story, the banker who gives and gives and gives and is about to be wrecked when the bill collectors come on him, well, in that story, everybody rallies and saves him. But in my reality, in my life history, in my epigenetic memory, well, the more good you do for everybody, the more they fuck you over when you need help. They take, but nobody will ever give.
So that's imprinted in your cellular memory.
Mm-hmm. So it guides the way that I look at the world and the way I anticipate what's going to happen in the world. But it's not actually what's going on in my life. So there's this backstory in the epigenetics, and then there's that is running that doesn't fit what's going on in the actual reality.
So it sounds to me like clarity is what you had. It brought clarity for you and an understanding.
There were a lot of aha moments that said, oh, like, this isn't really my thinking.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes perfect sense when you think about it from an epigenetic standpoint.
I'm curious, did you have any guilt when you read Mark's book?
So that's a really interesting one, because what I began to realize was people respond to this book very often with oh, it's your fault. They look back in their lineage and they say, oh, it's your fault, as though we've always got to blame someone. When in reality,